Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Into the Wild. Today we're going to be talking about human-wildlife interactions, both positive interactions and negative interactions. And again, I would like to welcome back my co-host, Dr. Nagendran.
Thank you, Rita.
So, to preface this episode, I wanted to begin by discussing just like a mini intro on what exactly we'll be talking about. So, when we talk about some of the major disturbances to wildlife, we often talk about the direct influence that humans have on the environment and to local like wildlife populations, both animals and plants. According to NIH, around 204 million people around the world continue to live in wilderness areas where interactions with these animals are bound to happen. And this makes human-wildlife conflict one of the most common issues we see today, although many populations of animals and humans have coexisted in non-violent conditions for centuries. Unfortunately, most of these interactions today are violent, which often lead to conflict. And governments, institutions, researchers, and residents of these areas prone to animal interactions often have differing ways of dealing with the issue, which can also be a source of conflict. This episode of our podcast aims to discuss these issues. With It aims to discuss these issues, what exactly the cause is, how scientists and governments are dealing with it, and how we can deal with it in an ethical manner. And we also will delve into some of the studies discussing this.
Sure.
Uh,
Thank you.
yes. So the first question is, what are human-wildlife interactions, and are they always negative interactions as the media portrays them?
That's not necessarily, they're numerous. First of all, there are numerous interactions with wildlife, right? Some of it is you go or humans go seeking these interactions. They want to see, they want to appreciate, they want to observe, they want to enjoy, and in some cases they want to consume in ways that basically removes the animal for their food or whatever purpose. So there's a multitude out there, and interestingly enough, humans perhaps have far more of these deliberate interactions than wildlife do on the reverse.
Mm-hmm.
Most wildlife don't necessarily seek out people,
Yes, they don't.
right? So they may, I mean, you've got birds that might become used to your feeders that you put out for them. And that's, again, you're deliberately putting it out for your pleasure. You're not necessarily, I mean, they're not necessarily lacking for food as much as you want to see them in your yard.
Exactly.
And and then other animals get attracted to that as well, because that's just a non-target species. You may not have intended to, for example, invite raccoons into your backyard,
Yep.
but then they come in,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And that can create a conflict right in your backyard. You did not want that raccoon. We've had that happen in our backyard. They are so much more destructive than a
Oh yeah.
bird eating a piece of seed and going away. Whereas a raccoon comes
Smart.
there, breaks things, digs, destroys. So right there is a complex situation happening. You've created an environment that brings you joy, that you've created an environment that causes you anxiety, angst, and if you're not the type that's going to remove that animal, you're going to have to figure out ways to cause displeasure to that animal so it doesn't seek to come back to your yard, which is a
Exactly.
lot more challenging because that animal has a brain.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of conflict interactions, it's not actually, there are numerous things like that. So an animal just going through your backyard does not cause conflict, but in the process, it may eat your apples, defecate, destroys something, and then starts to build up your anxiety level of potentially leading to this is a conflict between me and my, you have not thought about all the other things that have potentially caused that animal to come through your yard. But there's this other thing, there are animals that just are moving through.
Which is also a
And
type of interaction.
yeah, it's very interesting. We live in an area that is closest to the south of us. We have one of the biggest state parks in California, Montana de Oro.
Mhm.
The west of us, we have Morro Bay, okay? Meets the Pacific Ocean, okay? And surrounding us, we have areas, wild areas, basically, that's mountain lion habitat.
I've had some in my backyard.
Okay, so we would consider this area to be rural, but there's some people who think this is urban.
Yeah.
Have a lion that walked through my backyard. I need to call animal damage control and get that animal out of here. Wait, this is their habitat.
Exactly.
Okay, so you have to be careful how not saying you shouldn't have children here, you shouldn't have dogs, you shouldn't have cats. You just have to be extra careful.
Mm-hmm.
And we in this country have the ability to think through these things. We build in places. It's not like, in some of the areas like in Africa or South America, or even, obviously Asia, where you have poor villagers who are now living right next to a protected area.
Yes.
Where they didn't move to that place, but the protected area perhaps was designated, built on a piece, drawn on a piece of paper. And they are now, by misfortune, right there where the animal might be moving through.
Yes, that's an issue.
So, right. So the levels of interaction and the perception of conflict and the competition for resources.
Absolutely.
So there are so many issues. If an animal was moving through my backyard, there's really no competition for resources here in this part of the world. If a mountain lion was to take somebody's, 10 head of cattle and they're a small family farmer, there may be some issue there, right? So it's all levels. It's a complex issue. There is no one solution. There is absolutely no one size fits all. There are levels of tolerances that people have. Okay, so I'm a wildlife biologist, so I likely would be far more tolerant than a contractor who builds homes.
Or a contractor. Yes, yes.
Right? Or somebody who works in the banking industry who doesn't really give a flip. I'm not saying all bankers are who don't care about wildlife, but I'm just trying to contrast the different professions, whose interest might be what. So it to me is a multifaceted issue. So when I was reading some of your publications, I was looking at it also from each person is looking at it with one set of lenses, as opposed to I see it as, because I've dealt with so many different types of projects. Yeah, maybe in this particular area, maybe the tolerance is high so they can handle it.
Exactly.
Whereas here in my own backyard, where I would expect the tolerance to be high, I hear comments like, need to get animal damage control to remove that animal that was just walking through someone's, because it happened to be on its way to, the next part of its habitat.
Exactly. And I think that kind of mindset that we're on their land is important to have, because, I mean, you can't tell an animal to leave. What's it gonna do?
No, and you can do that, absolutely right. But I think more so in first world or well-off countries, you can choose to not build in areas where you have large swaths of wildlife habitat, but many of us choose to be there as well because we want that. And then we start to feel uncomfortable that, there's a bear in my backyard, not giving one bit of, you know, uh, attention, not paying attention at all to the fact that, you know what, maybe I should have thought twice about building here,
Exactly.
right? But you can't say that for everyone who's living a hand-to-mouth
Cannot.
existence,
Yeah.
right? And
Here we have
like
a
some
choice.
of the publications you have that say, yeah.
And then I also found a paper, which talks about, hold on, basically how it was written by, I'm gonna butcher this last name, I'm so sorry. Sabatier et al. And he basically talks about how the media immediately portrays animals as predators or evil when they attack someone, whether it's in the sea or in someone's backyard, and this results in like public harassment. And yeah, I agree with you. It's you also had in this case in the US we have a choice. And you really can't blame the animal for doing what it's been doing, evolutionarily speaking, for longer since the humans have been here. So, and I wanted to ask you, is that kind of view or portrayal dangerous, especially if they're predators?
Yes, I think having more sensitivity to the issue and looking at, there are some journalists who are exceptional. And for example, Mangabe produces some excellent articles on both the human wildlife situation and certainly, gives a lot more credence to wildlife needs.
Yes.
Yeah, I think portraying every animal that has a negative impact on humans as a predator and needs to be eliminated, or creating that frenzy and that hysteria, certainly makes it far more challenging for conservation. But by the same token, if you have an animal, if you have a top predator, I don't know what the behavior is like out with marine life
Yeah,
necessarily, but I can speak to perhaps some of the
terrestrial
terrestrial predators like lions maybe, or mountain lions perhaps, or even, the cats like
tigers.
tigers. And if they start to develop a habit and they realize how
Yeah,
easy it is, and it develops a learning pattern,
we've seen this. Yeah.
yeah, whether it's humans or livestock or what have you, I think something needs to be done to address it. Not take out the wrong animal, but maybe dart it and put it somewhere else, or put it in captivity. No,
Restriction.
you don't want to incarcerate it, but oftentimes it's not probably the best idea to just translocate it,
Oh,
because you're just moving the problem somewhere else.
mm,
But maybe if you wanted to observe it and see, is it a young animal, can it be, it's challenging, it's not easily done. There are some cases where they will remove it and move it to
yes.
a, a wilderness area where it's likely not to encounter uh, people or livestock or what have you. And there have been success stories that way.
Yeah.
So, but there are ways to do that. And certainly, one has to look at it from multiple sides. But also think about it. I think a lot of times when an agency is called in to address this immediately, some of them may be able to do that. Some of them may not have the resources.
That's a huge issue
And
too.
so they might, basically neutralize the situation, get rid of the animal to allay people's fears. So yeah,
You gotta look at it from every single angle, and basically every single conflict situation you're given. You can't, it's not like a cookie cutter policy where, like you
right.
said, one size fits all. We have to look at every single individual instance on its own.
And one thing though is, if you have an animal, if you know an animal that, if you've been able to confirm that a top predator, a terrestrial one I'm speaking to, is attacking people or their pets, and you know that for a fact, and not doing something about it actually creates more negativity to
Oh,
that
yes,
species. Yeah,
absolutely.
so So sitting back and watching this for however long could have a serious backlash on the
Yeah.
protection of the species. Yes.
I mean, we've seen this
They're not
happen.
the best ambassadors.
We've seen this happen. In India, there's a national forest called Gir where they literally house old man-eaters because they developed a taste for human flesh. I don't know how true this is, but I do know that the national park houses
La-
ex-leopards that have
well,
eaten
they have, oh, leopards. Okay. They have
leopards.
lions. That's the
They also
lion.
do have lions, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the primary area for lions. Yeah.
yes. I think that's the only place you find lions in Asia too.
Yeah.
Uh, so I guess we already discussed the question of what is conflict and how is it different from interactions. I guess we could say that conflict is where there's some sort of negative impact for either the human or the animal, whereas interactions could just mean something as simple as a deer walking through your backyard, right? It doesn't necessarily have to perpetuate anything negative for either the human or the animal.
Right. But it could be portrayed as a
Yes,
conflict
exactly.
because you didn't invite it.
Yes.
Therefore, yeah.
Like the raccoon. And then what are some examples of human animal conflict that you have seen personally or looked into or studied?
Um, I I have seen some pretty tragic ones where I would say, for example, elephants being killed on railroad tracks. I would call that human animal conflict. I know people were not hurt. Maybe their train was delayed or there was terrible damage to a train, but it actually killed the animal. And so to me, putting these tracks in places where animals go or having attractants on the other side of the track for the animal, like a water hole, that's a conflict that has been, over and over again. It keeps happening, and that's really tragic. The other conflict I've seen is where people, poor tea garden workers, have built their tenements near a tea estate, um, which is on the migratory pathway to a herd of elephants.
Oh,
And yeah, and so tea estate owners really don't give a flip about
yeah.
taking much care about the people who pluck their leaves. And I was at a village which has experienced tremendous human elephant conflict. And two men from a household, the father and son, were killed by elephants,
Oh
not
no.
because the elephants sought them, but they were working in an area where elephants moved through. And
Oh my God.
yeah, and so basically it was a household of uh, mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, and two little girls. And it was incredibly tragic. And so, all orphaned, right? And this is abject poverty. And so to me, that's just one case in point that I was actually there observing this, and it was just incredible. And what they had created was a tiny moat around their home. And I was thinking, for an elephant, I mean, if an elephant wanted to destroy that moat was hardly anything that it would it could just cross over easily enough. But they were trying to do what they could. And the other bizarre thing was the the children's mother, very young. And so they decided that the best thing for her was to remarry somewhere else in the village. And so now these orphan little girls were with the mother-in-law. She was gone. Mother was gone. So these decisions are made.
Oh my God.
I
Okay.
mean, talk about the complexity of the issue. So
Yes.
here's a situation where women have very little, you know, say in their lives, where they're treated like whatever
Yes.
commodity, I guess, to be sold.
Oh yeah.
You have this very tragic situation of two little children. You have, it's not the elephant's fault, neither is it the the village's fault probably. It wasn't a village that was there. The movement paths, lots of animals follow traditional routes of movement.
Yes, they do.
Okay. And here's this situation that has to do with the social welfare of the family,
Yes.
the inequities. Here you've got a T estate person who really all they care about, I don't know if it's a he or she or whatever. All they care about is making money in the marketplace. Maybe they don't make much, I don't know. That varies with the marketplace. But how do you address this in a way
Yeah.
that, and possibly it wasn't an elephant that was willfully trying to kill somebody, right? But how do you then expect these village folk to understand that level of complexity? Their thinking is this animal is going to come and get us.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
possibly the animal is going to get them because they're on the pathway,
Yes.
right? Not because it's seeking them out necessarily. It's not a tiger that's tasted the blood of people.
Yes.
Right. So I think there are situations like this that are very, very complicated. So, how we deal with this. I was involved in supporting work that was human elephant conflict was the theme. And the project proponents, the grantee, wanted to change conflict to coexistence. They said, we don't like this term. We would like to call it human elephant coexistence.
Oh,
That's
interesting.
fabulous. This was in 2006. I said, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to work on education programs to address
Yeah.
that, the safety, how to behave in a forest, because those are the things that are necessary.
The
Yeah.
education, yes.
Yeah. And so there's education, but there's also addressing this very complex situation of, you can educate these poor people, like the story I was telling you about, but you also probably need to look into their welfare.
Oh, yeah.
And that becomes an issue for the local government. They need to take a stance. There needs to be or there need to be policies in place. So and you can't expect wildlife conservation to be supporting all these other aspects because there isn't the kind of money or the funding to deal with human dimension conservation.
Oh, yeah. That's another one.
It needs a lot of money. It's certainly
Yes.
something that the World Bank and the likes of those need to, do more about.
Yes. It's interesting how you mentioned the changing the narrative from conflict to coexistence. I think if we all had that kind of mindset, this world would actually be a better place.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, like we're dealing with locally. This person was just all up in arms last week. This lion went through someone's backyard, and the lady said, she basically, I have this app called Nextdoor. Most everybody does.
Everybody does, yes.
And so this person said she's had a lion come through her backyard 3 years in a row, and she said she was taking her dog out for a walk in the morning, and she saw this at 5 a.m, and she said, people, be careful with your pets. And most everyone was just excited, and which direction did the cat go? And this one other person, you people are nuts, you shouldn't be, we have children here, we have pets here, we should call animal control and have them come and take the cat out. It's like, what? Do you know where you live?
Exactly. That's hilarious. Yeah, if only.
Yeah, so perception is everything. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there was also a paper from Cambridge, which talks about, it was written by Saloni, Bhatia and others, and they basically talked about how humans view wildlife is based on socioeconomic, education, how you grew up, your religion can also play a big role in
Yeah.
it. which country you were raised, whether or not you were educated, and if you had the level of animal interactions you yourself had as a child. And I think and also livelihoods and just behavior in general. I think, maybe I'm quoting the wrong paper. I don't know, but I'll put it in the description box below. But
One of
it
the papers, yeah, yeah.
it's very interesting to see, and even like in college, I'm a wildlife conservation major. We see so many different opinions about how things should be approached, and I think all of it stems from these various multitudes of how you were raised to view the world. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, the socioeconomic aspect of it, it's certainly uh, is important, and tolerance. Even some of the poorest people
Hmm.
can be pretty tolerant, and that's amazing to me. I've met folks who, I learned of a person in Nepal whose father was killed. I think it was a rhino, and amazing that he chose to become a ranger to honor his father.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like he was angry with wildlife. It was just such a moving story,
Wow.
right? I mean, so there are people.
Yeah.
So not all poor people, a lot of these people actually respect these animals. They just need to be able to get ahead. And it's also pretty tragic that in some of these places, or many of these places where you have wildlife tourism, it's not
Oh my God.
necessarily ecotourism, it's economic tourism, not
Yes.
ecological.
I agree with that.
Benefits don't go to the local
No, they
people. And so, when you start to have community-based conservation, when they take charge, when you help them to be in charge and they get the benefits from it, they can send their kids to school, they can have,
yes.
those kinds of things. They're not seeking to become millionaires, but they need to be able to benefit from it in
That's true.
ways that would also benefit somebody who's studying conservation issues, that those outsiders who actually care need to show these individuals how they can profit from it as well.
Yes, and you had mentioned how pe people in certain in poorer communities have chosen coexistence and not hatred towards these animals. Highly recommend everybody go watch this documentary on Netflix called Elephant Whisperers. Actually won an Oscar. It's about this couple that takes care of orphaned elephants, and it's like
Yeah, I
it's the
saw that. I
sweetest
saw it a
thing
while back,
ever.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the most heartwarming documentaries. I cried phenomenal. Um, so I guess this also goes into the question on how expanding human populations affect conflicts and interactions. And when I say human populations, I also want to make it clear it's not just, oh my God, human population, we're 8 billion people now, we're like encroaching into wild territories. It's also what we bring to these territories. I feel like people don't really understand that. I'll give you an example. So in South America, most of the deforestation goes towards agriculture, but it's actually cattle ranging, not necessarily people building cities in the middle of the forest. So I just want to make it clear that when I say human population expansion, it's human populations and what we bring to these areas. So,
Yes.
how do you think these conflicts and interactions are going to be like if this continues to happen?
It's going to be bad. It's going to be bad because you will have, it'll be, it'll basically, there's a lot of human conflict in this as well.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay. You
yeah.
see, you know, and the inequities of it, the human aspect of it, to resolve that takes those that have a lot need to be able to give some. The large cattle ranches, if they're giving something to the poor person that they're taking the land from, um, I don't know how much they're giving, if at all, or if they're actually taking a large swath of a protected area and giving the money to the government. You can imagine that a lot of it does not come back to the people, right?
Yes.
And the money that is gotten from the cattle that are raised there that comes into the US, in this case from Brazil to the
Yeah, it comes,
US,
yes, yes, yeah.
who is benefiting? It's not the local Brazilian,
No,
uh, indigenous community at all.
not
Okay.
absolutely.
So there are probably some serious flaws in that economic equation. I'm not an economist. I never will be one. It's good for me to just balance my bank account, be able to stay ahead of my bills. But certainly, those are problems that have a ripple effect on what happens to wildlife habitat as well
Mhm.
in these larger areas. In areas where there are billions of people trying to protect wildlife habitat and allowing wildlife to expand is very challenging. You protect habitat, animals do well, and then they start to expand because they have to disperse. They have, home
That's
ranges, they
natural.
have all kinds of things, right? And they have
Mhm.
to move. That becomes very challenging if you're going from, historic times when you had just a household of uh, okay, so in villages, say in India or Bangladesh, you had maybe a home that had 10 children. That was their social security, the insurance, right? Because most of the kids did die. There were lots of health crises.
Yes.
But since the advent of antibiotics in modern times, they still have many children, but they all don't.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they don't die like they used to. But then that has an effect on what it is that these kids have to inherit.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, there are these effects. So, if you maybe in a city, you have not an expanding population, you maybe people have their, two children, but you've seen the world population grow.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, I think there's going to be your land mass hasn't grown. In fact, it's probably reducing.
It's reducing, yeah.
Coastline is reducing. So I think there's a reality there. So there's that aspect of actually losing land. You're losing land for wildlife, you're losing land for people as well. And so it's again not a simple issue. It's complicated in many ways. You've got those that sit in cities that dictate what should happen in
Yeah,
the
that's an issue.
interface between protected areas and those folks that live along the adjacent areas. And yeah,
It's also
complicated.
it's also like again in relationship to deforestation because of which causes human animal conflict such as cattle ranching.
Yeah.
It's not even just the fact that you're encroaching on wild areas and you're increasing the probability of interactions, negative interactions between human and wildlife. It's also the fact that you're also adding to climate change in a way. We all know
Yes.
what, methane emissions do. We all know that, deforestation of the Amazons is absolutely detrimental to the atmosphere. So it's a much more complicated issue. It's like a multitude of mistakes,
Yes.
terrible things.
There are so many of those. So climate change, I used to say that it was the mother of all problems. I mean, there are problems, but it just creates such a
Oh
huge
yeah.
magnitude. And then you're going to see the spread of disease because of,
Already have?
yeah, because if your vector is moving further,
Yes.
uh, any number of things, any number of problems. And then have we reduced our consumption of carbon fuels? No,
Opposite, yeah.
no, we talk a lot more than we do.
Yeah.
So,
And then also another human wildlife conflict we could also talk about is spread of zoonotic diseases. I mean, in India, for example, you see a lot of human and like bat interactions, which has caused the rise of Nipah and Zika virus cases. that could also be considered a human wildlife conflict.
Diseases can be, yes, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So it's not just lion killing human, it's a lot of sub-variable
Yeah.
issues you could see too. This is an important question, which I was reading papers and I actually got a little depressed. What is the role of law enforcement and government in human wildlife conflicts? And I understand that every country, every city does it differently, but the overall theme I saw when I was reading three papers, which I will also put in the description box below, it seems to be like it's just no, it's just sad and they're not really doing anything and it's not holistic. So I wanted to know what your take on it because you've probably worked with these law enforcement before.
Well, so law enforcement has a role. Law enforcement role is to address, depends. You have protected area law enforcement, you have law enforcement in the cities, right? They essentially have to uphold the law. That's their duty. In terms of protected areas, they would try to ensure that poaching is reduced or
Yeah.
non-existent. How they do it now is a whole different situation, right? In some cases, they shoot the poacher. Some cases, law enforcement officers may not even have a gun in some places, and so they get killed. And so there are problems there in terms of actually getting addressing an animal that's inflicted harm on someone. Oftentimes, law enforcement officers, unless they're a wildlife biologist or trained, they're not equipped. More often than not, they're not equipped to humanely remove the animal.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what the
And
in all the articles.
yeah, so that's more of a wildlife biologist who is capable of that.
Yeah.
Law enforcement officers, it's rare. We have in our refuge system, in our national parks, etc., the law enforcement officers are wildlife trained as well. But they also have the authority to arrest.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the case in many countries. And so you'll see, for example, if you've got you hear about this frequently. Somebody shot a tiger, or somebody shot a lion, or somebody shot a leopard, and it's like they've got a gun and they took care of the animal. Okay. So yeah, it could be depressing, but it's not, that doesn't happen too often.
Okay.
I mean, that interaction is not necessary. At least I haven't seen it as frequently as maybe it's written about. Maybe, I don't know.
Interesting. One article from Cambridge again, this was published by okay, they didn't okay,
Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just haven't seen it.
okay.
Okay.
They talked about how they're relocating relocated tigers and relocated villages. They're basically like I think they talked about how they're relocating humans out of areas
Yeah.
where there's tigers. Yeah. Have you seen that happen? Is it
Yeah,
true?
we've been, I've been aware of a lot of those cases. What it is the media too oftentimes will capitalize on that, and there's some organizations that will try to make a big issue of it just so it's again a very complicated issue. So there are people who've lived in these protected areas, right? And many
Yeah,
people
yeah.
who've lived inside protected areas. What happens is once you've established it as a protected area, then with that comes certain laws and policies, etc., right? And all of a sudden, these people now are in conflict with that because they no longer can, before it was established as a protected area, they could go harvest, do whatever they wanted. I mean, they couldn't necessarily kill the animals, but they could go take, harvest the
Level of
trees or limbs and stuff like that.
coexistence. Yes.
But now all of a sudden it's breaking the law. You're suddenly in the middle of the forest, and so you have encroached in a way, or you need to. So there's that. there's also, and this shouldn't be taken lightly, a lot of these people are also seeing how the world is moving really fast.
Mhm.
Okay. And they have those aspirations as well. So the lives they lead in these protected areas historically may have been okay. Today, with the cities just bursting at their seams in many of these places, the cities are practically at their doorstep. And they don't have those benefits. They still have to go somewhere far away to get their fuel. They still have to go somewhere far away to get their water. And in the process, now they're breaking the law, which they weren't doing before. So it's become a very complicated situation. So the government in the past did not have good schemes for these people. They were hugely marginalized. They still are marginalized, but the laws are better. So now when there are relocation programs, they're given lands, they're allowed to choose where. There aren't that many lands, by the way. Okay. So think about that.
Yeah.
Enough protected or productive lands. Okay. Because it's going to take time for these folks to adapt to modern
Exactly.
day. The children may be going to school, but the parents are still living
Off the land.
yeah. So there's that serious social complication. The programs are much, much better for
Are they
relocation.
forceful relocations or?
You know where the forceful relocations are? Not so much for protected areas. They're with mining.
Oh, okay.
Mining and logging. Yes,
Okay.
that is very serious. You will see that in Africa. You will see that in Asia. It's horrible.
Oh my
Yeah,
God. Okay.
absolutely, because there's a lot of money to be made. There are a few big,
Businesses, yes.
businesses, and they will do whatever it takes. And there are deep pockets, deep pockets. Yes.
Wow. Okay. I thought that.
So yeah, using a national park for mining versus and kicking people out or marginalizing them, or using an area and then equating that to creating a national park and throwing people out. They're not on par. Not at all on par.
Absolutely.
I will say, though, it is not easy for these people to take advantage of these programs because it's like filling out an IRS form. Okay, for us, it's like, what the heck are they trying to say in this IRS, when you're trying to file your taxes? For these poor folk who've lived off the land, all of a sudden to take advantage of these government programs that are, quote unquote, going to help them, they need folks to help them. They need educated people to help them.
Mm-hmm.
They need people who actually care about conservation, who care about people to help them.
Yes. Again, community-based conservation.
Yes. Well, there's that community-based conservation is two things. Well, there's this, trying to find advantages for folks to take advantage of. But there's also community-based conservation where people themselves are in charge of conservation in those communities where they interact with wildlife. If you want to take a good look at it, it's a wonderful example of community-based conservation, community-led conservation. Check out the website of Planet Indonesia.
Okay.
They're fantastic.
Okay. We will get to community-based conservation in depth.
Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, they're not on par. The atrocities of, there are atrocities with wildlife as well, but nothing on par with
terrible
with what you see with mining and
yes,
those kinds of logging and maybe large. I think there was some of that probably with oil palm as well. I'm not sure, but certainly
especially
mining,
in Asia with oil palm, and then again with law enforcement. So I had wrote a little blurb where in Tirupati, which is in Andhra Pradesh, my home state in India, we recently saw last year the death of an attack of a wild cat on two humans. One was a child and one was an adult on the staircase up to the to the
The
temple.
temple?
Fun fact, I was there 2 days before the attack happened. So basically, the Indian Forest Department issued sticks to locals when climbing the mountain as a response to the attacks. And as a person who studies wildlife conservation, I thought it was funny, but like that was just, you know, a face. And it was later understood that these animals, so they actually
What cat was this? Was it a leopard?
a leopard, it was a leopard, yeah. So they brought down a lot of conservation biologists from the north to see what the issue is because they deal with cats more than we do in the south. And they actually figured out the issue was people obviously wandering off trails. So in the issue of the child, the parents were completely unaware that the kid had wandered off into the forest. Uh,
Oh,
and I don't know about the adult who got attacked, but so issue is obviously wandering off the trail. And then the second one was, and I have personally seen this traveling through southern India and all parts of India, in fact, feeding wild animals such as deer and feeding them things like Parle G biscuits. Uh, like I don't know, it just pisses me off. And basically, what happens when humans begin to feed prey animals such as deer is they start wandering closer to where humans live or walking, and they bring predators with them. So obviously the leopard was probably looking for a deer, and the deer happened to be eating whatever the humans were feeding near human grounds, and it followed the deer, and there's a conflict that happens. So now actually the temple has really strict rules about whether or not you're allowed to feed wildlife. I don't know how well it is implemented, but I've seen people, even in America, even in my own university at Davis, feed wild animals. I've told them to, I literally go up to them and tell them to stop doing it. It's not okay. So I think that's something else that needs to be addressed. And a lot of these people don't know that they're subconsciously affecting the environment in a negative way. People will be like, oh my God, it's a cute deer. It's on a mountain. Let's feed it. But they don't see that the underlying causes, like you said, it's about the raccoon. You don't know you're inviting a conflict, but you are. Yeah. So that is something I want to talk about. And then, um, yeah, again, I see it even here, which is ridiculous. But what are some conservation attempts being made to solve the problem? And you had mentioned community-based conservation and understanding what exactly is community-based conservation.
so to me, community-based conservation is where you build the capacity of local communities
Mhm.
for them to be in charge of developing uh, a program that benefits wildlife and benefits them. Okay. So it's not that you just dole out a few things here and there, and they have expectations too. They have aspirations as well. If they see you, coming in with in your Jeep and telling them things and then leaving and not actually showing them how they could probably also be growing their own wealth in a way. Okay.
Mhm.
Or you bring a bunch of people, go into the park, show them, and you leave, and there's nothing that they get from it,
Yes.
right? So there are things that they can do. They've, after all, been very tolerant of these animals in their backyard,
Oh yeah.
right? Right. And so now show them how they can benefit from it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very challenging because in this whole paradigm, you also have to see, uh, how you can prevent or minimize corruption.
Oh yeah.
Corruption is rife. There's always something or somebody out there that's going to try and figure out how to swindle the next person. And so that level of commitment, you can't just have one person getting wealthy and not wealthy or getting some amount of benefit from it and the others not. So how do you figure a collective to do that? So that takes a huge amount of commitment. It takes a different sort of mindset. It's not just you going and studying a tiger or studying elephants or studying leopards. and then writing about it as much as if you want your children to continue to be able to see them, how does that happen?
Mhm.
How do you make sure that the people that live amongst them, you're not going to get rid of these people. That's not the point.
The
If
point,
anything, people are increasing and animals are decreasing, but still, I think it it's important for community-based or community-led conservation to show or help these people benefit from natural resources that are amidst them, so they can also stop or reduce their need to exploit
they're doing this in Africa,
park in
yes.
ways that, yeah. So that to me is more very simply put, that, but it's obviously much more complex than what I'm telling you. Yeah.
Yeah. And then again, a good example of community-based conservation is UC Davis, and other universities actually work with local Native Americans to improve a lot of issues that in the wild. So, for example, I used to work with fish, and
Yeah.
UC Davis used to get all of its sturgeon stock from the Yurok tribe. And it's like this collaborative approach to conservation rather than the university going in and telling them what to do. Because they've obviously been here for centuries, they can tell us much more about the environment than we ever will ever learn about. So it's really important to take into account them before we tell them what to do. And in
Mhm.
fact, maybe listening to what they have to say. And a lot of this is just one example. There's like a lot of other conservation based issues that are actually being dealt with, how Native Americans have dealt with the issue for centuries. So when it comes to like storm flooding and lake flooding, some tribes actually used to build like marshes around the edges. So we've actually started doing that now, and it's fixed a lot of flooding issues within cities and small towns. So again,
Yeah.
yeah. And then again, how can education and the proper understanding of ecology improve the relationships that humans can have with wildlife?
Well, understanding the animal's needs are really important, first of all, because that doesn't change in a test tube, right? What we're doing is evolution in a test tube. That's how fast things are moving.
Yes.
But wildlife needs take a while. They may adapt to people around them, but they're not going to be able to change their feeding habits necessarily, or the food that they eat and the movements. There are certain things that they have to go a certain way. They avoid certain areas. So understanding that is really important before you can implement any kind of a conservation program. So, for example, if you think, and I'll take tigers for example, just as a terrestrial animal. If you think just by establishing a protected area, it's done, you might as well just put 4 walls around it and call it a zoo. Because if your protected area is open and the animals can move in and out of there, clearly, once the area reaches its carrying capacity, you're going to have animals disperse, going to have the younger generation move. They're not, and these are protected territories, right? They're ranges. So understanding how long a cub stays with its parents or parent, the mother, how much it needs in order for it to grow. Those kinds of things are really important. What makes it feeble? What might turn it into, an animal that starts to show more interest in people? People are not exactly the fastest prey animal, right?
Uh-uh.
We don't run as fast as deer. No way. And so, what might be the reason why some tiger is attacking people? Is it just because you went in there and crouched and it thought you were a prey animal? Or was it because it came into your backyard and it was preying on you and watching your movement because you were so easy to get? Maybe it had lost a tooth, maybe it had a broken tooth, maybe a claw, maybe some injury.
Yeah.
So those are things, there are lots of things that go into understanding, right? So ecology is really important. before you start to implement a conservation program, and also about education. If you want to start telling someone about what a tiger's needs are, you can't base it on mythology as much as this is what's likely to happen. We've already got
We need to,
25 tigers in this protected
yes,
area, and likely we're going to start seeing more movement, right?
I think a
And
broad,
that takes possibly you would need to collar an animal to see what the range is in
yes,
certain areas,
exactly.
right?
A more broader, I guess, a broader understanding of also animal behavior is also important,
Yeah,
which
absolutely. Yeah,
is a topic in ecology. So yeah.
right.
Um, and then
And
even
then also understanding the difference between animals, right? So in some places, you see like wild pigs in the, anywhere, most places, wild pigs are far more destructive than maybe deer.
yeah,
They dig up the land, they have multiple piglets,
piglets, yes, they run
and
really fast.
there are very few animals that prey on them,
Yeah.
and humans are
Yeah,
not efficient predators.
I saw some yesterday. Tiny
Yeah,
little black wild pigs, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're
they're
not
very
cute.
destructive. Yeah, actually, that is true. If you go to Texas, they're having a huge issue with
Yeah.
wild pigs.
They have open season on wild pigs in Texas,
They
and
do.
still they don't have
Yep.
any control over it. Yes.
And then I guess the more holistic, broader question, as people now, people who are watching this or listening to this, what is something that we could do to mitigate these negative interactions within our like local communities if we want to spread awareness?
I think it's important to, and I'm guilty of that too, to, have a reaction when someone says, get rid of that lion. It's like, whoa, 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 come on,
Calm
it's become very combative. But I think more importantly is try to understand where they're coming from, and be a bit more patient, like you said, listening and dispelling fears. Yes, it's scary if you have little children, even yourself, right? You're going out in dark and you've got a lion. Well, do you want to maybe learn a bit more about how you might protect yourself against a lion if you're
Exactly.
going out by yourself? I read oftentimes, I think, okay, if I go off on a hike here, what should I do? Because I know people encounter lions here. So, so what do I do? Do I go out there and say, here, lion, have a daisy? No, it doesn't work that way. So maybe I stand tall, maybe I carry a stick, maybe I don't run from the lion because I cannot outrun a lion.
Exactly.
So I think being very patient and being more tolerant and being less reactive and deep listening,
It's
see where they're
interesting
coming from.
you mentioned this because I feel like a lot of the issues that people who said, for example, let's just go get rid of that lion, I feel like they have the same fears as everybody else does, but it's just that their approach is different and we need to like understand why
Yeah.
they're approaching it from that way.
There are lots of people like that. I have very little patience with individuals that want to get rid of things. Like, we have issues here where you have 2-lane roads and people feel you have to drive. To me, the term speed limit, for example, means that is the upper limit.
Yeah.
To them, it means that you absolutely have to go at that upper limit when you're driving.
No.
And we have, and I, go look at the dictionary. What does speed limit mean? So to me, would I be going 55 miles an hour in a road that should actually only be 45 because we're sharing it with bicyclists? And
Yes,
what if I were to hit them around the corner?
exactly.
Then what do I do? Do I say, oh, I was going the speed limit?
No.
So, I mean, think about it. So I think I can react, but maybe my reaction is not a good idea as much as being patient. But I can say that, but my initial reaction is, whoa, wait.
Exactly.
It's listening and takes a lot of patience,
Yes.
certainly.
So I guess those were all the questions we had today. And
Excellent.
we did cover a very deep topic
Yeah,
and
it's a complicated topic, and human
very
wildlife coexistence is easier said than done because one size does not fit all. A raccoon in my backyard is not the same as an elephant that took away the bread earners of a family,
Yes.
you know, and then the complexity of all those, the social aspects of that, and then, you know, the translocation of people or relocation of people from
Also,
protected areas is not the same across the board, how terrible it is with mining versus, you know, this national park. But the national park situation is also not easy. And in the past, maybe it was coercion, but now there are programs, but they can't understand it. So, you know, they're out there. You don't want them to come out of that and become beggars. That's not the idea.
no,
How do you work with that situation? And it's
exactly.
such an inflammatory thing. And, you know, governments get all up in arms. You're supporting this and you're supporting that. No, you know,
Not to
you're
mention
working with people who are trying to help others. So yeah,
exactly.
it's not an easy thing
It's
for
not an
sure.
issue. And I think just again, patience and understanding is the key.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways,
Well, good luck.
thank you so much for coming today.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye.